Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, today I am going to do some pressure canning and I'm going to make some meatloaf. And let me tell you what, I've made meatloaf before in the pressure canner and it is outstanding. Right now I have 1 quart jar left that I pressure canned back in 2014, I believe it was. And I'm saving it so that we can open it in 2024 to see how it stands up to 10 years of storage. Now, this is not going to be an instructional video on how to pressure can. This is going to be me sharing my recipe with you that I use for making meatloaf in the pressure canner. And as you can see, those are the ingredients in front of you, with the exception of the ground beef, of course. I do not put any fillers inside of my meatloaf or inside of my ground beef when I make meatloaf to go in the pressure canner. And what I use is, starting from left to right, is I use some brown gravy powder. I use some garlic powder, some salt, some black pepper, some beef stock. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, we need our adobo. And we're going to use some onions. As you can see there, we've got 2 large onions, 1 red, 1 yellow. You can use any kind of onions you want. You don't have to use onions if you don't want to. In addition to that, I have a bell pepper that's inside my fridge that's getting a little bit old. I think I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there as well. But what we're going to do to those onions is we're going to turn them into mush, right? So we're going to process them until they're like a mush, and then we're going to add them to the ingredients when we put our meat inside the bowl. So what I'm going to do now is I have about 15 or 16 pounds of meat. I'm going to separate it in half and do 1 batch at a time because I don't have a bowl big enough that can handle 15, 16 pounds of meat in addition to all of the ingredients that you see there in front of you. All right, so let's get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add about 1/8 of a cup of adobo. You know, the adobo's got to go in there. And this may sound like a lot, 1/8 of a cup, but remember, we've got about 7 pounds of meat here. All right, so you're just going to add that to it. Just a little bit of salt. I'm going to say probably about 1/16 of a cup. See that? It's about half of this. About the same thing with garlic. That's the salt. About half of this. If it's a little more, it's not going to kill it, but that's fine right there. I'm going to put probably the equivalent of half of that 1/8 of a cup, so about a 16. If that's what you want to call it. I don't know how to convert it over to tablespoons, but I've done this several times and I know about how much I need. You can put in as much or as little as you want. And then, ladies and gentlemen, I also add some brown gravy mix to mine. I add about 1/2 of a cup per load. And let's see. Oh, there's a little bit left in there. We can add a little bit more. It's not going to hurt anything. It's actually going to make it tastier. And then the last thing that we need to add besides the onion is going to be some beef broth. I'm going to add half of this quart, so about 16 ounces. Now, many of you may say, well, you're adding all that broth. Isn't it going to make it watery? Well, I kind of like that because adding the brown gravy to it is going to give it a good flavor. But when we add the broth to this and mix it all up, it's going to be really watery, right? So during the pressure canning process, most of that water is going to be extracted from the meat and the meat is going to compress. So it's going to leave a lot of nice broth for you so that you can make a gravy with. So that's why I like to add that. Now we're going to add about half of this container of onions right here, about half of it. All right, now we just start mixing it up really well. If you've got kids, put some gloves on them and let them go to town. This will take a while. And ladies and gentlemen, some of you may ask, why don't you add any like ketchup or tomato powder or tomato paste or anything like that? I've done that before and I just found that it doesn't really add much to it. So whenever we take it out and cook it, or not cook it, but reheat it to serve, if somebody wants to add some ketchup to it, that's fine. They can. And usually whenever we reheat this, we'll reheat it in the air fryer. And putting a little bit of ketchup on top really makes it really nice when you put it in the air fryer. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this up. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We're pretty much done. All we have to do is get our jars ready and fill them up. And then start the canning process. Now, those of you that don't know anything about canning, maybe you just ran into this video. First of all, thank you for stopping by. And if you want to learn about canning, I do have a whole bunch of canning videos in my videos section if you go to the channel. I'll go ahead and leave one that I know has good instructions on how you can do canning, and it is a video where I can some meats. So if you want to take a look at that, take a look at the right upper hand corner of this video, and you'll see a little card there. So I will be back when this is nice and fully mixed. That's what it looks like, ladies and gentlemen, when it's all mixed up. Nothing special. So now all we have to do is just fill up our jars. This is how easy this is. And I hope that you try this if you've never made meatloaf in a pressure canner, because let me tell you what, it's delicious. So I'm going to go ahead and fill up my jars now. I'm just going to show you one thing that I do when I'm filling up my jars. That way you can maybe try it also if you don't have the tool that's needed. So they sell a tool. It's like made out of wood, and you're able to squish everything down into the jar. I didn't really feel like having something extra in the kitchen, so all I do is I just take my rolling pin, I take the ends off of it, and then I just wrap it in plexi plastic or in plastic wrap, right? That way none of the food will go into the little holes. And then I use this to tamper it down. So let's go ahead and fill one up, see how it looks once we fill it up, and then I'll do the rest and then be back to put it in the pressure canner. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That'll do her. So I usually just fill it up to the neck right here. And when this is processing, like I said, all of that liquid is going to separate from it. It's going to make this meat in there compress in diameter, so it'll be easier to take out. Plus, you'll have all that extra juice in there to make gravy with it. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and fill up the rest of these. It looks like I'm going to have to do 2 loads today because I think I took out way too much meat for just 1 load. Ladies and gentlemen, success. This is what it looks like after it's done. Obviously, I cleaned up the jars. And guess what? We had 1 jar that did not take a seal. So right now, I'm warming up that jar because I put it in the refrigerator overnight because I noticed that 1 jar did not take a seal before I went to bed. So I put that 1 jar in the refrigerator. Right now, I'm in the process of warming it up so that we can go ahead and put the meatloaf inside of a pan where I have some potatoes cooking. So stand by. I'm going to go ahead and grab that jar. We're going to take the meatloaf out so you can see what it looks like. And then we're going to go ahead and dump it in with those potatoes. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be very tasty. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the one that didn't seal. So I went ahead and warmed it up in a hot water bath. So I'm going to dump it in this bowl so that we can separate the actual meatloaf from all the juices. And that is what it looks like. If you look at it, it doesn't look extremely appetizing, but I guarantee you it's going to be very tasty. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this in pieces, and I'm going to heat it up with some potatoes that I cooked up with some peppers and onions. I can't wait. Let's take a look. All right, this is it, ladies and gentlemen. Let me see if I can cut this with one hand. Very nice. Look at that. The inside looks really nice. It is full of flavor. Let's go ahead and finish cutting this up, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with the juices that came out of that jar and with this meatloaf. Now, remember how I told you that if you put that broth in there, that it was going to enable the meatloaf to come out of the jar nice and easy? And it did. So not only that, but it gives us a little bit of juices that we can flavor our potatoes with. So let's go ahead and do that now. So ladies and gentlemen, these are just some potatoes that I fried up and cooked with some onions and peppers. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dump this broth in here. This is the broth that was in the jar. I dump it in there, along with a little bit of that grease that came out of there. And I'm going to cook this on high until that broth reduces. Then after the broth reduces, I'm going to go ahead and put some of the meatloaf in there so that we can heat it up thoroughly. Now, ladies and gentlemen, look at that. Only thing that I would have to say about this is that it does need a little green. So some green beans or some salad next to it would be perfect. But we're here for the meatloaf. And you know what I always say, the taste is in the pudding. So let's give it a try. And ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? This is full of flavor. I did not overspice it. So if you follow that recipe that I used in the beginning, and I was mixing the meat, it is perfectly spiced. It doesn't have too much of anything. And it is just full of flavor. And the extra little peppers and onions that we put in there, when I fried up the potatoes with this, it's the perfect complement. Now take a look at these beautiful little potatoes. As you can see, that's what the inside of them looks like. They're nice and tender, and they do taste very good. Because I did try one earlier after I made it. And look at that, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get a little bit of this pepper and stuff in here. I mean, do you really want to be eating like this, or do you want to be eating MREs? I mean, even without anything happening, this is just good eating right here. Let's give this a taste. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? I think this is definitely a winner. All right, and of course, in times of crises, if you don't grow your own potatoes, you can always substitute mashed potatoes with this, which would go great with mashed potatoes as well. I hope you got something out of this. I do hope that you try canning some meatloaf, because I'm telling you, it is delicious. Remember to be good to each other. When good people do good things happen. Remember to reach one, teach one, and repeat. If we all did this, the world would be a better place, and you know that it will be a better place. Many blessings to all of your families. This last prepper, I am out.